In this video, we're going to talk about ethical leadership, specifically how ethical leadership relates to transparent communication. We're going to look at a model of transparency and how it applies to organizational settings. So let's unpack the details. Hello there friends, Alex Lyon here, and today we're going to talk about ethical leadership. Normally on this channel we're talking about communication and leadership, and this topic is near and dear to my heart. I wrote about this in my book. I'll put a link to this in the description below the video. You can also visit it on the website as well if you would like. So today we'll talk about my bird's eye view of ethical leadership, specifically about communication, and then I'll unpack a three-part model of transparent communication that's in that book. So first, here's my big picture view on ethical leadership. Ethics is everybody's responsibility, and it's not just because it's the right thing to do. Bad decisions are often bad because they are unethical. In other words, unethical behavior is bad for business. If you look at a lot of the problems that we've seen in organizations over the past 15 or 20 years, a lot of them started internally with bad, unethical decisions. So it's not just about doing what's good because we want to do what's good and be good people. It's because it's going to also destroy our organizations. So I really believe that part of this is communication. We often see a tension between secrecy and transparency in organizations, and on the side of secrecy, that's where a lot of these problems begin. So I believe and agree with Matt Seeger and Rob Ulmer. They wrote about this in an article in Management Communication Quarterly, that leaders have what we call communication-based responsibilities. They have a responsibility to be informed and get informed about any of the potential problems that are happening in the organization, to create an atmosphere where those problems can be identified and then solve those problems. So there's my bird's eye view on transparency in organizational settings. And now I want to get into this three-part model, so let's unpack it. So on the flip side of this model of transparency, we have this issue of secrecy, and that's usually a sign of trouble and usually something you want to avoid. It leads to lots of unethical behavior in the long run. So let's talk about this organizational transparency model, and it has three parts. The first part is organizational openness. So when you have an open organization, all the compensation, hiring, and firing decisions are all pretty obvious. Everybody knows the rules of the game. The way you get projects approved or maybe not approved, it's all really open. People understand the expectations. And that's the kind of organizational openness you want, where everything is out in the open and plain to see. The processes are not secretive or hidden. A lot of times if people don't know how things get approved, how people hire, get fired, how you get a raise, you end up with a really political kind of organization that can turn negative. And so you want to create a process that's really open and the rules of the game are obvious. The other part of organizational openness is the obligation to speak about problems that you see. You have an obligation to talk, as Karl Weick said, because if you're not speaking about problems that you see, you end up with what Karl Weick calls pluralistic ignorance, where you see a problem, something that looks out of place or odd, but you don't say anything about it. And then the next person maybe sees that same problem, but doesn't say anything about it. And everybody knows there's a problem, but no one's speaking, so it's called pluralistic ignorance. And by speaking about it, by having that obligation to talk when you see a problem, you puncture pluralistic ignorance, and then the problems can be identified early and solved. So organizational openness is a huge part to establish this culture and this atmosphere to lead to more ethical communication and leadership. The second part of the model is information sharing. Information should be shared widely because high quality information leads to better decision making. If you find that you're in a context where people are holding back information or leaving specific details out because they want to get something approved, that's a sign of trouble. That's another type of secrecy. The reason you want to share information is because if you get all the information on the table, you're much more likely collectively to have a healthier decision-making process that you can really move the organization forward. If you're basing your decisions on half-truths, on strategically ambiguous information, you're going to end up with poor quality decisions. So Nilsen, one of my favorite authors, called this idea significant choice. People have the right to make an informed choice about the significant issues in their lives, and in this case, in organizational settings. If you're going to base information on manipulation, on partial information, you're going to get bad decision making. The third part of this model is candor. Every once in a while, you're going to have a conversation about a sensitive topic. Oftentimes, the topic might involve somebody personally. And so here you need a mixture of open and honest communication, but you also need a balance of care and kindness. So to me, candor is both of these things. You don't want somebody who's brutally honest with you. You just want them to be plain spoken about the issue, to broach the topic so you can solve the problem. They have to do that with care. You don't want to be the kind of person, and maybe you know the kind of people that will end up hurting people's feelings routinely and say, well, I was just being honest. Yes, you need to be honest and open. You need to be candid, but you also need to do that with care. And that way you can have difficult conversations without fear that you're going to hurt people's feelings all the time because you're too brutish in your approach. So those are the three parts of the model. Question of the day, which one of these do you find most difficult in your particular professional setting? I would love to hear your comments in that section below the video. So thanks, God bless, and I will see you next time.